Well, this afternoon, the economy is already back on track just months after Ghana secured the IMF bailout. That's according to the Finance Minister, Ken Ofori-Atta, who's signaled there's a hope on the horizon. This afternoon, we put that to scrutiny and also hear from former Deputy Finance Minister Mona Kote. But first, though, an insight into the country's insatiable appetite and, of course, the leaning towards borrowing, as it's been the case. We've titled, of course, our new series on the Hotline documentary, A Nation That Begs, and in the following excerpts from the documentary, which airs later this evening in terms of part 2, on the JoyNews channel, data analyst Kofi Ejay walks us through how Ghana moved from hero to zero in the Eurobond market, where the nation found itself pleading for debt relief in both domestic and on the international capital markets. Here are excerpts.
As foreign liquidity began to dry up, exposing the weakness in Ghana's economic fundamentals, the only option was for Ghana to turn to the IMF for a bailout package. Professor Bokpin sounded the alarm bells. He said going to the IMF was inescapable.
I personally don't think that the IMF is a long-term solution to our problems. And the reason I say so is that we've been there 16, 17 times. Is that okay? And practically every 3 years and some few months, we've had to go to the IMF and all of that. But as we always say, what takes us to the IMF has to do with the fundamentals. And as we sit right now, everything points to that.
The calls to register for an IMF bailout became intense.
After seeing Article 4, after seeing the COVID report, Article 4 2019 and the COVID report, and seeing the fiscal gap which is there, that was when I expressed the view that maybe it's time for us to go, that's how far back, to go to the fund, because it's not just about COVID. But we got all the COVID money, as I said already, and we could have used it to make a correction. Because the COVID money we got for ECF was 913 or so, million US dollars. Here you're talking about 6 billion. Why was it not sufficient to do the correction? Something fundamentally wrong.
Government's position was very simple. No IMF program. It has so much hope in using domestic means to turn the nation's economic fortunes around.
We are not going to the IMF. Whatever we do, we are not. The consequences are dire. We are a proud nation. We have the resources. We have the capacity. Don't let anybody tell you.
In the raging storm, Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta was insistent that government wouldn't subscribe to an IMF program.
If because of political pride and the rest of them we don't want to go, that is a different thing altogether. It should not be our first resort. But we have not demonstrated that on our own we'll be able to impose a fiscal consolidation that would elicit the appropriate response from duty bearers, as perhaps we have seen in our relationship with the fund. If we could do that, why not? For 60-something years of independence, we can't keep going to the IMF. Anytime we go to the IMF, I feel that I feel we've lost something, right, as a sovereign country and the rest of them. But IMF doesn't impose itself on any country. Through countries' own actions and inactions, mismanagement of the economy and the rest of them takes them to the IMF. So if we arrive at that point where homegrown solution has probably failed to get at the same result, we'll do that. I believe that in 2014, when the government made a call to the IMF, it wasn't because it was their first resort, right? Yeah, the fundamentals dictate so.
My position has always been, once the government, on our behalf, whether I like it or not, says we are not going to the IMF, then my position changed. Then show as an alternative.
IMF cannot save us, right? Because we've done IMF 16 times, getting to 17 times now. We were on an IMF program for the best part of this government until recently, right? Up to the end of 2018, this government was on an IMF program. The good thing, though, in that respect, is that it does show that being an IMF program imposes more discipline. Because this government itself argues that all the way until early 2019, they were doing brilliant. What that means is that they were doing brilliant during the IMF program. That's an important point. So to make the case as if IMF is a problem is strange. If you did IMF from 2017 all the way to end of December 2018, and the economy was doing well as per your own analysis, then what is the argument anymore about IMF being a poison or a toxic element that you need to avoid? The government's attitude tends to be that, oh, we don't need IMF because IMF is bad. In a way, they don't say it directly, but it implies that it's bad. And I'm arguing that from 2017 January, when they came into power, to 2018 December, that's 2 years, they were running an IMF program. Now, when you ask them about their financial track record and their performance, the government likes to say that, oh, until COVID hit, we were doing brilliant. And I'm saying that if that track record is one you are so proud of, you did that under an IMF program.
Despite government's insistence, the honorary vice president of Imani Africa, Bright Simmons, was hopeful government's best bet was seeking an IMF support. But beyond the political ego, was there any historical experience preventing government from approaching the IMF for liquidity support?
During 2018, when you were under an IMF program, you were growing at 8.3%, right? You were doing fantastically well on inflation. Exchange rate was stable, right? We did not see massive unemployment based on some IMF restrictions or whatever it is that you've been calling it. You did the IMF program for 2 years. We know these are some of the reasons why you don't like the IMF. In April 2018, the government was forced to acknowledge that it lied to the IMF about its external arrests and was forced to apologize, right? You have to write to the managing director of the IMF and apologize that somehow you forgot whatever, some data was not there, blah, 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 blah. Of course, that is why you don't like the IMF, because that extra discipline, that extra scrutiny may not be something that is to your liking, but we have to look beyond your ego and think about a country. Yes, the IMF will insist that you disclose the data. You will not be able to play the games that you play with us here, where you say something, where is the data, you refuse to disclose the data. They will insist. So that might not be very pleasant for managers in the government, but that does not mean that it's against the national interest. We should distinguish between IMF program elements that may not benefit Ghana, of which nowadays there are not that many because you yourself have to come up with a proposal and you yourself have to negotiate it. And then IMF program elements that may not benefit the government, ministers and officials that may be responsible for designing and implementing it. I think the two are not on the same scale. And while the IMF will not transform Ghana, while the IMF will not change Ghana's fortunes dramatically, our argument is that it's no worse from the things that is already happening.
Well, so that's what you should be expecting later tonight when the full documentary, The Nation That Begs, airs at exactly 8:30 p.m. here on the JoyNews channel and available on all of our social media platform. Joining us for a conversation on this, we have Isaac Ofieje himself, who produced that documentary. We're also fortunate to have the former Deputy Finance Minister, Mona Kotey, joining us. Hello. Thank you for spending some time with us. Let's start off with Isaac, who's here with us, because Isaac, you've been looking at the data. The finance minister has also been speaking about this whole IMF conditionality and the program itself. So walk us through some of the key items the finance minister is pointing to, and let's situate that in this very documentary that you've put together.
Right, so the finance minister's message was very simple, that even with this 3 billion IMF bailout program that we are running, it's supposed to support government-owned domestic program. So what they call the PCPEG, the post-COVID economic recovery program. And if you look at what the finance minister has been saying, it simply tells you that if you look at the debt restructuring that we did both at the domestic and external, we are still in talks with our creditors. But if you look at the domestic level, we said, bingo, it was successful at 85%. But per what we are reading from the finance minister's statement and his engagement with the media yesterday, you can have a sense or a feeling that government will still go ahead to engage other creditors in the domestic space.
So a second debt restructuring may take place in the coming days.
They will not term it that way,
right.
But if you've already said something is successful and you're coming back to engage other people,
right,
then we probably will term it as a second debt restructuring, whatsoever they would want to call it. Right. But as we speak, government wants to go to the negotiation table with some, groups. First one is organized labor. Why? Because organized labor in the first exchange program, they were given complete exemption. Now government is saying, come back to the negotiation table for fresh stocks. This is supposed to help government to attain that, 55% debt to GDP ratio they want to achieve in the medium term. They feel if, organized labor is not on board, it will be so difficult to reach this. IPPs have been also asked to come back to the negotiation table for fresh stocks. Why? Because if you look at, external creditors who came to invest about 1.6 billion in our economy, we actually restructured those external people debt as part of the domestic bonds. And you are looking at Eurobond markets. The debt that we owe the Eurobond markets are mostly pension funds. So if you are going there to restructure pension funds in the Eurobond market, then you must start.
And in fact, what's more striking to me is the fact that we may have to go back to this topic about the pension bond holders because it's not out yet. They're not out of the woods.
They are not. But, you were given complete exemption and now you are being asked to come back. I spoke to Abraham Kumsin, the Federation Secretary, and he says that government really wanted to do this in April, but because of the May Day celebration and all that, they couldn't go to the table for fresh stocks. Government surely will place the call, and they are certain that when government plays the call, they are going to suffer.
Isaac, we'll talk about what's likely to happen tonight when we watch The Nation That Begs, but I want to bring in Mona Kote, who's also been listening into the conversation. Honourable, first of all, your thoughts on this fear that we may have to do a second round of internal or domestic debt restructuring. Are you, first of all, surprised about the development?
Thank you very much, Blessed. Good afternoon to yourself and to your listeners. No, I'm not surprised at what Isaac has just referred to. I'd like to just put our conversation in context. So we know that last week the IMF staff were here and they had a lot of conversations with the members of the Ministry of Staff and government. And their assessment, as they said, pointed to some positive signs of stability with, as we all know, some tailwinds that have come from natural resource prices going in the right direction. We've seen Brent crude and WTI prices, oil prices, stay below $80 per barrel. We've seen gold price do very well, closer to $2,000 than $1,900 per ounce. So in terms of our receipts on natural resource, we continue to do well. We've seen fuel prices go down. We also saw the front loading of some of the conditions that the IMF had asked government to make, especially in the area of tax reform. So we saw new taxes kick in terms of revenue administration, again, which was another strong area. We saw work on that begin. And we've started to see, for example, property rates being actively collected by GRA, or let me even say at least bills going out. So we'll see how the collection also goes. So we are seeing new tax policies, as we've said. In terms of the foreign debt restructuring, I'm not even quite sure if that is completely concluded. Maybe Isaac can speak to that. But from what I gather, it is close to conclusion, but not totally concluded. And that gives assurance to the IMF to give us, as it were, the drugs that we need to stay in intensive care. Then on the domestic front, which you asked me about now, I believe that negotiations are still ongoing. I don't know that we are close to the end of that at all, because what is on the table now still does not sound like what pensioners especially will accept and what labor will accept. So I believe that is still work in progress. And in as much as the government is caught between the devil and the deep blue sea, they will have to make some compromises. They cannot continue to dip into a market and then make bondholders and bill holders unhappy. I mean, we've talked about treasury bills that went on auction recently, and we saw that we now have an inverted curve where the shorter dated bills have a much higher interest rate than the longer dated bonds. That is a signal to government that they need to do much better They cannot continue to talk about haircuts and on interest and even change of maturity. You know, that kind of credibility is gone between an issuer and an issuee. So that has to be resolved. Therefore, I believe that there are still issues to do with debt service sustainability, which for the IMF is a big issue. And also for those of us who hold treasury bills and bonds is an issue if you want to just...
In fact, the target that government set for itself was short of the IMF expectations. We're hovering somewhere around 97 billion, Isaac, correct? 97 billion. That's what we're working with. But it's now... It's now clear that we're nowhere close to that. I mean, first of all, what does this point to for you? For some, and the experts have raised the issue about transparency on the part of government in terms of reporting economic figures. That is also beginning to come up in this whole conversation.
So, Blessed, first of all, what I'd like to say is that, I mean, for those of us who've been in those offices before, we knew that it was time to go to the IMF. And that is because we were in a rabbit hole. And we needed to dig ourselves out of that hole. We've been in that hole several times. So this will be the 17th time, that we found ourselves in this rabbit hole as a nation, because we have problems with our fundamentals, our fundamental economic structure. We have problems with that. So with all that has gone on and the unfortunate reckless management of our economy over the last 5 or so years, we are now in a rabbit hole that we are finding very difficult to even come to the zero mark, to the top. And the IMF has told us upfront what we need to do. We are struggling to do it and to get there. Yet I continue to hear the economic management team and the Ministry of Finance team, including the minister himself, praising themselves and saying they've done well. I'm not sure what it is that they've done well. It's work in progress. And we are all praying for them, that they will be able to get to that zero level where the IMF is planning to take them over the next 3 years, get to that zero level, so that as a nation, we can look forward to a bright future, bright golden future. So at this point, really, they'd still have some conditionalities to meet in order to get the other tranches of the 3 billion that they're expecting. You know, we already got 600 million.
Right.
There are other tranches that are yet to come, and there are still milestones to be met in order to get it. So there is a lot of work to be done, and I don't think it's time to pat ourselves on the back at the moment. This is the time to work hard to get to the zero level. Once we are at the zero level, we can start looking at planning for what is next. In fact, we should have planned for that already. What is next? What does Ghana need next? So my direct answer to you, Blessed, is that there is a lot of work ahead of us until we get the liquidity that we need, the total 3 billion. And remember, it's a loan that has to be repaid. And the IMF is making sure that by the time we get to that zero level, we are able to repay that loan and any other loans that we would have taken out. So it's not free money at all.
In fact,
getting us to the
in fact, the finance minister points to some 6.2 billion that we're expecting from our international partners. We'll talk about that in detail. While at that, the president has also been speaking this morning. He's rather taking on the international ratings agencies. I just want us to listen to him briefly, and then we open up that leg of the conversation.
And I can comfortably and convincingly say this. As the AU champion for African financial institutions and leader of a country which recently had to deal with one of the most difficult periods in its post-independent history, difficulties which were exacerbated by the reckless behavior of rating agencies that engaged in pro-cyclical downgrades, shutting Ghana out of capital markets and turning a liquidity crisis into a solvency crisis. Afro-Exim Bank, under its counter-cyclical response mechanism, provided timely support to help Ghana navigate the macroeconomic management challenges, worsened by Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine, in an orderly manner, when suddenly we realized we were alone. The country which had become, quote, the favorite child of bondholders and had successfully gone to market at the height of the pre-COVID-19 downturn, was suddenly shut out of international capital markets. It is often said that you know who is truly your friend when you are in trouble, and is rightly stated by Dr. Martin Luther King in that often cited quote, "In the end, we'll remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends," unquote. When you're dealing with powerful international financial institutions, it is important to have your own powerful financial institution. And it is so important and significant that I'm here today, just a few months after that liquidity crisis, hosting the 30th anniversary celebration of Afri-Exim Bank. What I have just said about the great relationship between Afri-Exim Bank and Ghana, most of my colleagues in this room and across the continent and the Caribbean could say the same thing.
Well, so that's President Akufo-Addo speaking at the annual meetings of the Afri-Exim Bank, which is underway here in Accra. In fact, I was in that hall when the president was making that statement, and I'm just wondering why the president will decide to go on a warpath with the international ratings agencies. And in fact, we'll take the thoughts of Monakoti shortly. But Isaac, help us with the trend. Since 2022, we've seen that downward trend. The international ratings agency not being too favorable with a country that used to be the poster boy, if you want to call it that way.
In the Eurobond markets. I'm actually surprised because in 2021, when we became the trailblazers in the Eurobond market.
And I love the description from the president, by the
darling boys.
Yes.
You know, it was these same ratings agencies that gave us those positive outlook, and that all the creditors wanted to lend to us, even at 0%. And so if at this point we are in a different situation, and they are using those same methodologies and they are giving us downgrades because of what is happening, I simply don't understand why the president has a problem with the ratings agencies. But maybe he has his own data, he has his own facts.
Well, for instance, let's take a look at, is it Fitch, for instance?
Fitch, yeah.
I mean, very
consistent.
Harsh
you know,
ratings for us.
It was in only 2022 that government suffered about 11 downgrades from Fitch, Moody's, S&P's. Downgrades kept hitting us in the face continuously. And at a point where even in RD, I have never seen Ghana in restricted default position before. Like junk. That was in 2022.
And that's why you're putting up a nation that begs. In fact, let's not take the detail out for those who would be watching later this evening at 8:30 p.m. But Mona, your take on what the president has just put out is his beef with the international ratings agencies and how unfair they've been to us. Will the standards change, by the way, if we opt for an African-led ratings agency?
Blessed, I think Isaac has said it all, but coming from a finance background, let me just put one thing out. No matter where you borrow from, okay, the lender will have an economic model, a financial model that they run, and they will look at their credit factors and decide, on what kind of borrower you are and lending to you. And credit agencies who will speak to some of the issues that you as a borrower have in your economic space, and that also helps the lenders in managing the amounts that they give to you. So the credit agencies are a necessary part of the lending business to sovereigns and other corporates. Therefore, we don't only say they are good when they give us a good rating and then get upset with them when they don't. I mean, when I was in office, there were times when they gave us good ratings, sometimes they downgraded us. But what it did was it gave us feedback on what to work on and what to make better in order that we can get better prices for what we borrow, and also how to be debt sustainable and how to best service our debt. So I think that we should take the feedback from credit agencies in good faith rather than the way that it was done. I think you and I both know who the reckless managers have been, and definitely not the credit agencies. Blessed, I want to say one thing now, just in case I'm not able to say much before the end. What is very important for us now? What is our next step? At the end of this 3-year program, we should be at a stage where we know exactly how we want to transform our economy. We need a deep structural transformation of our economy. How do we do this? We need to pivot clearly from being a natural resource supplier into the international market to becoming one that adds value and one that also ensures food security at home, use of what we produce, and sale of what we have in excess to have cash liquidity, which is one of the issues we are having now. As simple as this may sound, it is difficult to implement, and we appreciate that. We've been in office before. The idea is to gain wisdom from counsel. And I think it's time for our managers of the economy to have a consensus from all, like the way we had when we met, we had the meetings in Akosombo and so forth, and invited all of them. And come up with a plan that will take Ghana from the next 3 years, when we are now at ground zero, to the next level of our transformation. We can no longer be the Ghana of 1957. We have to be the Ghana of 2026 or 2027 when we finish this program, so that we can be stronger. The program is always there, the IMF program is always there for us to go to, but we must go stronger this time. It's a pity that this time, different from 2015, we are going so weak. But for me, it does not matter. It is how we rise. So I think that is what is important now. We need to pivot from here and transform into a stronger
As we wrap up, your expectation ahead of A Nation That Begs Part 2, of course, we saw your boss, Seth Tekpe, featuring in that documentary, your expectations. And also, as you wrap up, can we, going forward, sustain our economic recovery in a way that will pull us completely away from running austerity plans in the future?
Yes. I'll answer your last question first. Yes, we can sustain our recovery from 2026-27 onwards with a new economic management team. Definitely not with this one. Yes, heroes to zero. That tells a sad story about Ghana. We've had so many opportunities to do well. You heard Seth and other ministers speak. One of the things Seth talked about was the fact that we had talked about going to the IMF already. This team of economic managers didn't think so. Last minute, they changed their minds and went. That's fine. It's good. What is worrying is how all our financial buffers have been eroded. I mean, we had debt reserve accounts. We had so many accounts set up. The energy sector levy that we were collecting, and it was doing well in paying down debts within the energy sector, was all eroded. It was even collateralized and borrowed against. Where are all those monies? The COVID monies that came in, still not accounted for. I think we need to hold these economic managers, the current ones, accountable, so that even as we go through the program, we'll come out stronger. So I do see that we could come out stronger, able to sustain our debt levels, able to keep our budget deficit low, maybe not at zero, but bring it down and grow the real sector of this economy. Ghana can do well depending on the economic managers that we have.
Okay, so we'll subject that to the 2024 elections, but for now, we're grateful that you're spending some time with us, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And that's Mona Koche, former Deputy Finance Minister, joining us here on The Pulse. As we wrap up, Isaac, what are we to expect tonight?
Well, so tonight is the part 2 of A Nation That Begs. We've already spoken about it, from hero to zero. So we are telling you how Ghana became that darling boy that President Akufo-Addo was talking about in the Eurobond market, to a point where we had to beg other people to forgive us of our debt. It's a 3-part series. We've already aired part 1, the Genesis. You can go and find it and watch on our social media platform. Tonight, we'll be airing the part 2 at 8:30 a.m. here. PM, on the JoyNews channel. And then next week, we'll bring you the final part, which is Painful Haircut, where we speak about Ghana's painful debt restructure, where people actually lost their investment.
Okay, I've got that going on already with the haircuts. Thank you, Isaac Kofi joining us, and you want to make time for A Nation That Begs later tonight on the JoyNews channel at 8:30.